Okay, so we're live. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Childcare Business Growth Podcast. I hope you guys are having a super start to the new year. Welcome to 2024 with the very first podcast of the year. I'm excited to have Emma Pinnock with me. Emma, welcome to the podcast. I'm really grateful for you being with us today. Now, today, what I'm going to ask you to do in a minute is give a quick introduction to yourself. But what I'm excited for you to talk about today is obviously helping children that potentially may have been identified as needing some additional support. And how that's relevant. Obviously, there's a lot more children coming through right now that we're seeing from centres, and sometimes maybe staff potentially are struggling to deal with that. They don't know what to do, and it brings lots and lots of challenges. And I'm excited to come to you as an expert in this topic today, where you're going to share all your knowledge and wisdom around that. So, Emma, tell us a little bit about you and what you specialize in.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being the first podcast of 2024. That's really great. So nice to meet everyone and to meet yourself, Nick. So myself, Emma Pinnock, I am a consultant. I have been an educationalist for over 20 years. I'm primary trained, so I've gone from early years all the way to year 6, and I've also worked in the secondary and special sectors of education. So I've had quite a varied career. And now I'm a consultant supporting schools and families around special educational needs. And when I'm in schools and early year settings, I'm working on people understanding their processes, understanding their children, understanding what progress looks like. And this is all focused in on a little bit of two sides of my professional walk. So even though I've been a teacher for 20 years, I'm actually a psychologist at heart, which was my first degree and what I've developed on. So the two worlds have collided over the years.
Awesome.
So,
So tell us a little bit, Emma, what we're going to talk about today in more detail. Give us a bit of a background to where you feel some of the challenges are right now, and then we're going to talk about some of those topics and ways to help deal with those challenges.
most definitely. I think children with additional needs have always been in our educational systems, but the system has changed. So what we're finding at the moment, especially in the UK, is that a lot of early years settings are getting children who would have historically been in more specialised settings.
Yeah.
So early years, nurseries, foundation, schools with foundation settings are all finding that they're getting children with what we would describe as more complex needs. They're just
Yes.
different, but they can appear to be more complex for the mainstream school. And so the picture is changing because the way that people have seen SEND in the past has to change now. The way that we're teaching young children and approaching their teaching styles have to change now, because the SEND that schools have historically had were more likely to be able to engage with the mainstream curriculum, engage with how things were flowing, maybe at a different pace, but they may have been
Yeah.
able to engage. But what we're finding now is that schools are potentially needing two curriculums. They're needing an approach that's very different, that's very bespoke. And this is a challenge for people that haven't had the experiences with children that have more complex and obvious need.
So whether you're watching this from the UK or US, wherever you are around the world, all the core points that Emma's going to touch on are extremely relevant to you. Now, your protocols of how you would deal with these things in your country are obviously more specific. What today's session is going to touch on more is around, hey, how do you deal with these things? Well, one of the big things I find as well, Emma, a lot of the clients that we work with, they vary obviously different countries, but ultimately one of the biggest challenges I find as well right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there are lots of new staff coming into the industry that this may be very new to them, and they struggle to deal with those maybe more complex needs. Is that something you come across quite regularly as well?
Most definitely. I think there has been a little bit of an exodus of experience, should we say, when it comes to education. There seems to have been this space where people that have been in the education world, and as we know, things just recycle all the time, ideas
Yeah.
recycle, strategies recycle. And so as we've had this seeming exodus of people that are more experienced, we have got people who are less experienced in education, but that also brings its challenges. It brings its pros because obviously fresh eyes, different energy, different focus, but it does bring its negatives as well. And I think it's that piece as well that people haven't really got the experience to lean on as much. And I feel as well the way that I was taught to teach has changed a lot. And I'm thinking only in the last 20 years. And so, in terms of what the expectations are for young people in the early years now, it's very different than when I started in 20 years ago. And so, that's a different pressure as well. So, the expectations of children have risen, but the actual needs have also risen at the same time, which is actually a pressurized place for everybody. And everybody's learning as they go. So, that those that are new to the profession do not have that space to really bounce those ideas off.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
I see it a lot, actually. A lot of the centres, not only are we potentially new staff are coming on board quickly, you're thrown in the deep end, but equally as well, if you do have maybe one or two children that have some more challenging needs, that on top of being new to the industry is even more complex for those individuals to deal with, and it can be overwhelming, and people end up leaving as a result of that. So we're going to talk about today. We're going to give some tips for people, regardless of where they are, in terms of how they can maybe help identify and help they can deal with these children that might have some more complex needs. So tell us some of the core elements that you believe that anyone can implement at a foundation level.
Most definitely. I think the first thing that I always say to every teacher that asks me for help is observation is key. Everything we do with the young people is about observations and relationships. And if we can truly observe what is happening for young people, we can make more informed responses to their learning. Okay. I think that's a really key thing that I think we lose the power to do. And I know as early years, we are always observing, got our little iPads out and taking photos. But I mean, really observing with a purpose, observing with an intention of understanding how can I interpret what might be happening for this child at the moment, especially if the child has reduced language skills or is at a pre-verbal stage and can't share their world with us. And so...
Sorry to interrupt there. Do you find as well, though, that sometimes as a result of that, maybe people misdiagnose, or they feel that someone might have an issue because they're just not aware of what to look for in the first place? So does that affect the observation then? So give us some kind of a bit of a background or any comments on that one, if you don't mind.
I think because we're in the learning space at the moment, and with any learning space that we're in, there are sometimes the expansion piece where we end up kind of putting all behaviors into a box and thinking, it must be this. And I think that is happening as a result of people being more conscious, which is part of the learning curve that I think we're all on. But I think the ways that we can really look at this is that some of the behaviors we see with children with additional needs are just the behaviors we'd all have at different times. Mm-hmm. And so what we need to be thinking about is the prevalence and the impact of that particular outward behavior. So is this behavior here and unable to be changed? So what you'd find with a neurotypical child is that if a behavior pops up, or they're not sharing, or they're not, engaging in a communication, and you explain, you will find that that might change a little bit quicker than a child who is neurodistinct, because the distinct mind is basically potentially more self-directed, potentially trying to work their world out in a different way, and someone explaining that to them may not be as simple. So you have these two sides that you need to look at. So you'll find, especially in the early years, that a lot of the behaviors are presenting as each other. But it's about how quickly you can start to move those behaviors on through explanation, through demonstration, can kind of highlight where that child might be. If there is a neurodistinction there, it may take a little bit longer for a child to move on. And when I talk about neurodistinctions, I'm talking about autism, ADHD, different ways of seeing the world, dyslexia. You'll find that certain behaviors are more entrenched if they have a neurodistinction, because their brain is learning how to create their world. And so that would be one of the things to be conscious of. I think the other thing to be conscious of is that we can see things that can step outside of what we call the norm. And these are things to be curious about. And curiosity for me is not about giving an answer. It's not about saying this is definitely this. It's literally about going, I want to be more curious about that. I'm going to observe. Observation is key. I'm going to observe that piece for that little bit longer. I'm going to keep putting that piece into perspective. And also,
Yeah.
I'm going to put in other parts of the jigsaw. Because sometimes what happens, so if a child, say, is slower to speak than their peers, people may jump to the conclusion that this is a neurodistinction straight away. They may have
Yeah.
this idea that this is it. But actually, again, we need to look at the prevalence and the impact, but also the other pieces that might be around that child. So are we looking at things like relationship building? How do they create relationships with their peers, even if their speech is a little bit more limited? How do they actually engage in a teacher-led activity? What does that look like? What do they feel like? Are they struggling with that? How do they make sense of generalizing their learning? So do they role play? Do they take things and enjoy playing with them, even when their speech may be limited? So
Okay.
it's always about this really wide picture. We want a wide picture. We don't want a narrow picture and saying because we've seen this one thing, there may be something. But I do want to say is if you see that one thing, be curious, because that's going to help you to understand that child a little bit more and maybe head off into an identification space because there is something that needs to be supported and there is something that needs to be helped going along.
So a quick question from my perspective. I always try and play devil's advocate a lot. I always challenge things.
Yeah.
So I know people are going to be watching this right now, wherever they are, they're going to be thinking, look, I've got new teachers in my centers right now that are struggling to deal with maybe these additional needs. How can I, number one, reassure them?
Yeah.
How can I get them to a point where maybe they can at least do some of the basics to be able to help? Because, one of the biggest things I know from having our own centers is the issue around how long it takes to get additional outside support is a big problem. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, and I know that's happened. Look, give me something in the comments, everyone, if you have the same issue in your facilities around getting that support. But, what would you say to those owners to be able to support their team to do this? Because let's face it, some owners may not have the experience themselves in dealing with these challenges. So what would your thoughts or ideas be in terms of how you would support those owners to deal with these things too, these additional challenges?
Definitely go out and educate everyone. Yourself, your leadership, your middle leadership, your people on the ground. I feel that's the best way that we can get ahead of all that is happening at the moment is really through education, making sure people get on the right courses, the quality courses that are going to give them skills and insight, but also a space to go, this is the challenge that we have. This is the space that we are in, because every setting has its own unique challenges when it comes to this. The children
Yeah,
are different in each setting, but each setting has a unique
of
challenge.
course. Yeah.
And so it's recognizing what the unique challenge is in your space, recognizing what your staff, the areas that your staff may feel challenged by. So for some settings, your staff may be more challenged by behavior. For some settings, your staff may be challenged by the lack of communication and how they get to actually communicate with the children. For some settings, it may be that your staff find the emotional regulation piece quite difficult. And so you've got to recognize what it is that's happening for your staff, have a really clear picture of what that is, audit what's happening for your staff, and then you got a nice basis to start from. And
Okay.
then you can start to fill in what those gaps look like. So if I was to go through all of those examples, so behavior that challenges, and some children with additional needs will come in with behavior that challenges. And it's
Mhm.
about recognizing about self-regulation for your staff. How do you regulate? How do you call on your support from your colleagues? How do we ensure that as a setting, our behavior policy is really reflective, but also supportive of the child, but reflective
Yes.
of the environment? So how do we make sure all of those sections, all of those things are watertight so that I'm giving you as a leader the best support that I can? So that was what I would say around behavior. If
Yeah.
it was speech, I'd be talking about, okay, so what do we need? Do all of our staff members need Makaton or BSL? Um, do we all need to be really clear about the one approach we're going to take in terms of communicating with the children across? Do we want to become a communication friendly setting? So we want to think about the kind of visuals we use, the kind of signs that we use. And so you've got to be really succinct about what it is that the challenge is in your setting. And if you can be succinct about the challenge and the potential holes in training and knowledge, then that's a really clear path then to be able to support. BSL is British Sign Language.
Yeah, I was just going to say we had a question come in asking what is BSL, so British Sign Language. Obviously, there'll be alternative versions for you guys out there as well. And Makaton training for those that are not familiar. Do you want to just give a quick overview, Emma, into what Makaton is as well, if you don't mind?
Definitely. So Makaton is kind of the bridge between BSL and speech. It's a sign and word. So it's hello, there's more, there's thank you, there's please. And so you're saying the word with the sign so that you're supporting language development, but also giving the child a communication aid in the process of them developing speech. American Sign Language.
Someone's got American Sign Language. Awesome. So,
Yeah.
so you touched on obviously there. Observation is key. What? Let's go back to the actual teacher, practitioner. What else? What other tips would you give to them to be in the day to day?
Okay, so most of what I'm going to say about today is going to be focused on your practice, because then it gets more honed in when you're talking about the child as an individual. So I'll focus on practice. So in terms of observation is key, it's really, really key for that. You've got to be able to take a minute, absorb what's happening, and think about what's happening for that child at given spaces. What does the behavior of them pulling your clothes mean? What is it that they're actually trying to communicate? What have you figured out from that? What is the communication when they go and sit away in the corner and they don't want to engage with anyone? What's actually happening there? Is that a sensory need that's happening? Is that a moment that the child just needs to get away from the hustle and bustle of the space? Is there a way to create that in a more inclusive manner? So all of the observations then lead to the curious questions about why is this happening? What's going on? And once we work out that, we need to think about sensory needs, communication needs, physical needs. So does the child know when they're hot? Does the child know when they're cold? Does the child know when they're hungry? And actually, how do they communicate those things? I always say, when it comes like to parents and people in early years, think about how a baby before they come to you may communicate those things. A baby will cry and have different cries for those things. And so what you want to then think about is, what is the different ways that this child is now communicating for these things? So is it because they're hungry, they've now moved away and sat next to the boxes, the lunch boxes, but they haven't touched them. They're just sat there. So it doesn't look like they're saying they're hungry, but they've just sat there. So it's just about creating a what if kind of approach in your mind once you've done that observations. What is the curious bit? Now, I would also say is that the curiosity has to be built around training. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to know that you're looking for signs of sensory needs and what that actually might look like. You have to think about the patterns of the day and what the child might be able to be trying to share. You have to think about how this child may want to communicate with their peers, but actually don't have the skills to do that. And it's about creating this path, as I said, of what ifs, so that you can start to put small things in place slowly and surely. So one, you're not overwhelmed and the child's not overwhelmed, and that everybody's feeling safe. I would say the other rule that I always say is safety. Everything about a child that has additional needs safety. All children need that, obviously. But when a child has additional needs, the world can become a little bit more worrying for them. They can become more overwhelmed by the world, more overwhelmed by the sounds, the touches, the slightly raised voice. And so what can happen is what needs to happen for a child to be their most comfortable self, their most at the point where they can have their most potential reach, is that they have to feel their most safe. And the way that you can do that is ensuring that we're not just pushing a child into something because we think they have to do it at that age. We're actually allowing them to lead a little, supporting that leading with a lot of care, a lot of patience, and a lot of support, so that that trust and that safety can be really developed, so that they can then say, actually, I'm ready to make a risk. And if we, yeah, and if we was to think about education as a whole, I like to believe that all education is a risk. Whenever we learn something new, whenever we go out of our normal way of doing things, it's a risk, even as adults. And this is the same for children. They are risking every time they learn. And so if a child isn't safe, they will take less risks. So the more we can keep a child safe, we can keep a child knowing that their particular way of seeing the world will be understood, will be cared for, will have patience for. That's going to be so key for them.
Love that. Love that. And from a perspective of, if that support isn't available from the local authorities, the state, or whoever it is that you get that support from, as an owner or leader, what's your thoughts around how you deal with that in the meantime? Because obviously, we talked about training. What other types of support are available to individuals out there? Yes, there's different training courses you can send your team on. I know we're going to touch on some things that you do later on. What other options of support are out there for the member as well?
This is the challenge that we have in the system at the moment, unfortunately. And there's more and more services like myself that are developing, but this is the challenge we have in the system, that there isn't a lot of independent places that people can go and rely on that have real quality of knowledge as well. And that's not to go, I've got all the knowledge, but there's quality and there's quality, right? And I think there's a lot of things that are happening in the system at the moment where people are realizing that there's a gap here, but they're not necessarily filling it with the right quality. So due diligence, really clearly looking at what it is that you want as a setting. As I said, audit. Be really clear on the audit side. Be really clear about what you need to be doing and why you need to be doing it, and find the people that really can fill that gap with knowledge for you and your staff. That would be what I would say. So in the UK at the moment, there's a few independent spaces developing, but there's not much outside of the local authority to support people, really. I'm sure that this might be the same experience for those in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot. It happens a lot, definitely. So
Yeah.
in terms of, let's say someone was kind of like in a state of, I don't know, SOS right now.
Yes.
So they're in that situation where they really need help. They've got maybe a child that they just, has additional needs, and they just really don't know what to do. I know you offer this support, don't you, in terms of, because one of the big things, the reason why I'm going down this path is because I don't think that support is readily available to people. It's a big challenge for people right now. I remember with our centers how long we had to wait to get additional support, or at least someone to come in and provide some assessments. And that was just phase one, let alone then being able to get some actual support or not. So I know you provide support for people, again, all over the world, because you can do this virtually. Tell us, Emma, about what you do in terms of the SOS service that you provide.
So the SOS service stands for Send Open Sessions. And this is basically where I have 10 professionals on a call with me, and we bounce ideas and thoughts about a particular situation you may have going on in your setting at the moment. So a particular child, a particular approach, and I lead that with my expertise. But what I also do is get others to speak about what they might have done in those same spaces, because what also happens is that we don't have enough time as educationalists to get in a room and go, but what are you doing? And so this is part of that as well. So I will lead that. I will obviously share my knowledge around that, but I also encourage, as a group of 10, all of us discussing what it is that's going on for that child, or what else could happen and what else can be put in place. And so it's been a really well received service, and people find it really valuable because they can book on weekly. So if on Monday you've got this thought, by Thursday you could be having a conversation with me. And so that's why people are finding this really, really valuable, because they are just jumping on and going, this has been the week. This is what's been happening. Have you got any thoughts? And that's been a really valuable space for people to come in, really.
I can see why that would be, because it's instantly accessible almost. It's there that you can do in the same week. It's very affordable as well. Do you want to just tell everyone the cost, just to give everyone an idea of this?
Yeah, so from a UK point of view, it's £30 per person. So it's
So you're
really
looking roughly US, yeah, it's about 38 something dollars, something to pound the exchange rate. So nothing much at all.
nothing much at all. And the reason why I've kept it like that is because my one-to-one services are a little bit more expensive than that. But obviously, because we are sharing knowledge together and we are focused together, that's why it's that price. I just want people to feel that they can get somewhere quickly and ask a question. And if I'm able to answer, that's why that price is at that point. And do you want me to go into the other things that I
Yeah,
do?
what I'm going to do, so we talked about obviously the SOS session, the one, and that's the link you've given me, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to post that link now. So if anyone is interested, make sure you go and check that out. I've just posted that in the comments for you guys to be able to go and jump on a calendar session with Emma. Tell us as well, Emma, about the other services and support you provide too.
So the rest of my services come underneath the ACT. So it's audits, consultancy, and training. In the audits, it's about getting underneath what's happening for your setting. So I look at systems, I look at staffing, I look at your children, I think about what it is as a whole that may be causing a challenge, or maybe not even a challenge, just basically, where are you and what could you do next? Because I'm a great believer that we shouldn't only engage with services like mine when things are a little bit challenging. We should be engaging when things, are going okay, but actually we want to know what we can do next, because this is going to be a long journey for education. This is going to be a journey where education really needs to be going underneath and understanding how children learn with additional needs, because the more they are in mainstream environments, that's what we've got to get to the point of. And they may not learn like their peers, but we have to know how they learn. So this is going to be a long journey really for everyone. So I have schools that are at the very beginning of their journey of understanding where they are, and when I audit them, the pages could be a bit longer. And then at other points, I've got schools who have been doing inclusion work for X amount of years, have really good systems in place, but they actually want to know how to get into the next stage of their practice. They want to push it a bit further. So I find my audits really valuable, and so do my clients. I just find that they really understand their settings after that. Then after an audit, you can say, Emma, we're happy, we can get on with this ourselves and we're happy to continue, or actually can you walk with us a little bit with the content of this audit and support us to put that in place, which is the consultancy part of what I do. So the consultancy and the audits can stand alone, but usually they're better together. And so the consultancy piece is basically we work on a strand of what's come out of your audit, or a strand of something that you've already identified in your school, your setting, your early years. And I come in and support your staff. I can either be online supporting your staff, or I can be right there next to you supporting your staff as well. And so that's part of the consultancy part of that. And there's different packages throughout the year, up from 5 days up to 20 days, depending upon your need. And then in terms of the training, I have some online training packages, but also live training that I can either deliver online or again with you. I prefer the live training just because it gives you a chance to bounce your questions off me.
Yeah,
it gives you a chance to understand where you are and really fill those gaps in. And so the live training is what I do prefer to do. The training that I have is accredited. And so you've got accreditations that can come out of the training as well.
Nice, excellent. So lots of different options depending on where people's needs are right now. There's obviously the SOS call, there's the live trainings, there's the consultancy, there's the audit. So you basically have something to suit everyone, regardless of where they are as well. I love that. Emma, is there any last tips or points that you want to mention for anyone on this? Any last bits of advice you'd give them right now?
As I've realised throughout the call that actually I've been quite surface. And the reason why that is the case is because when I am with you, when I work with you, this is when I say can get into what's happening for you and your
Of
children.
course.
Because the key thing for me is recognizing that every child that comes to your door is bespoke, but definitely if they've got additional needs. So that means my practice with you also has to be the same. But if I was to give you any general rules, observation is key, most definitely. Be really, really open minded around where you want to take your practice. Be curious about the next steps of your practice. What does it mean to have this child in our setting? How can we make sure that this child is going to learn to their potential so that we're not actually reducing their potential? What does that mean? And that curiosity is really, really important. So being open, being observational, being really, really curious would be the really starting points. Practically, I would also say just get the training, be really clear about what that training is going to do for your setting and ultimately for the child. Be really clear about what your setting needs. Is it around behavior? Is it about communication? Is it about emotional regulation? Or is it just about the learning process for children? um, Understand the differences that children are going to be bringing, because we see them, but we have to understand them. What does play look like for a child with additional needs? Why is it still play, even though it doesn't look like play like other children? Understanding these things are going to help you to see the children in a different light and move their potential forward. And so that would be for some of the few things that I would say at the beginning.
Excellent. Guys, lots and lots of amazing advice there from Emma. Emma, I'm extremely grateful for you joining us today on this. I think, as you said, you've only just touched the surface of the support you can provide. Make sure if you're interested, obviously, in getting in contact with Emma, you'll see there's a link where you can go and book a call. Definitely get on one of those calls. This is going to be a way quicker path for you guys to get the support you need right now. If you have children that you do feel might need some additional support right now, and you need to get that help in pretty quickly. Emma, I want to say a massive thank you to you for joining me. I know obviously you've been doing some training for us as well inside the EC Mastery program. If you guys want to go and check that out, make sure you go and check out ecmastery.com. Emma's done some great training over there to help you, that you bite-sized chunk training you can go and access. Emma, hopefully we'll touch base again in a couple of months from now and talk about how things have evolved, and get you on to do some more training. That would be amazing. And then obviously we've got the link for people down below. So make sure you show Emma some love in the comments. I know obviously lots of you get lots of value from these sessions. And Emma, I look forward to catching up with you again very soon. I'm very grateful for you joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emma.